Hello, in this video I'm going to be breaking down my process of how I made this diptych consisting of two oil pastel drawings done in color. One is done on paper and the other one is done on canvas to make it look more painterly. So the purpose of this project was to get started with color. It always was a bit overwhelming to me. However, working on the still life did simplify using color since I'm focusing on one color at a time. And then I have the fun aspect of it, of doing it in the style of an artist that I really admire named Frantisek Kupka. Hopefully by watching this you can take away something from my learning. Before going into the drawing, I did some color studies to familiarize myself with oil pastels. I've never used them before, so I have a couple different quadrants in which I did different things. So the first quadrant, which is the oranges with the blue background, I used this brand of oil pastels that I can't remember the name of. I'll show you a picture of them. I found them to be a bit more waxy than what I wanted. I wanted something softer and more painterly so that I could layer the pastels and not have it be too much of an issue. So the second oil pastels that I bought, I did a little bit of research and found something more to my liking. I found them much softer and easier to blend, and I found that I could layer them and have it look kind of like paint layering on top of each other. It's all a matter of preference and what suits you better. I just found that those suited me best. Anyway, for the studies I did 4 quadrants. For the first study, which is the top right, I copied a picture that used complementary colors. I found it best to focus on objects that are one color and learn how to properly convey that one color. For the second, I drew a plastic fruit from life and then I chose whatever color background. The background for this one is a bit more opaque than the first one, and even than the fruit itself, because that's when I switched to the new oil pastels. For the bottom 2, I drew a white bowl from life, and I chose a rich purple as a background. I found that emulating the white glossy surface of the bowl was a bit difficult, but that's why I chose it, because I wanted to challenge myself. I think I went a little bit too far with the reflective light, and it does come across as a purple or a bluish bowl rather than white. The study on the left was blended and the study on the right was not blended. Now moving on to the still life drawing, this is drawn from life with a help of a photo so that I could work on it from home. After deciding the composition for the piece, I chose a toned paper which I thought would suit the undertone of the piece best. Starting with a toned paper or canvas when drawing or painting definitely makes it much easier to lay down color tones, because I find that when I lay down a color on a white piece of paper, it's harder to grasp the true tone of the color in terms of relating to the piece that I'm working on. So on a white piece of paper, it might seem darker or brighter or more saturated. So to start, I did a simple grid and I looked at my photo to get a proportionate outline on my paper. Ignore the perspective of the Lego block, I did fix that later. But then I used my color wheel to decide my color palette and color combinations on my main objects. So this is my color palette. As you can see, I had chosen complementary colors to see how they would blend, and I wanted to have them chosen so that way when I worked on the drawing I already had everything kind of laid down in place and knew what I was doing. But once I had my chosen colors, I started blocking out the color tones with the main objects until I had a rough layout of all the tones. I preferred to fill out all of my color values to see how they match up as a whole, rather than working on a piece starting on one place and then working my way around, because seeing it how it all relates to each other again makes it easier to keep it all consistent and keeping the color relativity matching. So when I blocked out my colors, I used some layers of different colors to create a good base tone when I started blending. So for example, if I was working on the avocado, I laid down a little bit of red, around the darker areas, and then I would go in with the green on top so that I already had it down. So on paper it looked green, but then once I went into my blending stage, it all started to blend together and the red areas with the green on top started becoming brown. So I was working left to right. I started with the drapery and so on. I will say that rendering this white drapery was such a challenge. I had to keep in mind all the reflective light bouncing off of it, and not only on the white part, but also on the pinkish part. And that pink was really hard to figure out in terms of color combinations so that it looked like what it actually looked like in real life, which was a bright magenta almost color. More like a hot pink, to be honest. But after I began rendering the color, I thought this was such a fantastic process, and I'd never used oil pastels before, so I decided to make a video time-lapsing the process, so here you go. This is where I left off. I wasn't necessarily completing each area, just getting closer to the finished product. And I just kept on rendering until I finished. I saved the glass goblet for last because I was very intimidated by it. However, it wasn't too difficult to draw. I would just throw down a layer of yellow and a small amount of orange where the orange was in the goblet before adding a layer of green. I also added some lilac in some areas to desaturate the yellow tones as well. With this whole still life, I used complementary colors to make every single color on here, so I didn't use browns or blacks for any shadows. I find that when using complementary colors, it does give an object a lot more dimension and it makes it less flat. So part 2 of this project is in the style of František Kupka. He was a remarkable Czech painter and artist. He's more known for his abstract paintings, but he was classically trained and could paint some amazing figurative pieces. Personally, I love when abstract meets figurative, so I used his painting The Dream, made in 1909, to convey the still life in a dreamlike state. Here's a short time lapse of my 2-hour process. I did one layer and used linseed oil to wash the first layer. I gave it some time to dry and created the outline. After that, it was a much faster process than the original still life. It was a lot more intuitive, and I tried my best to use Kupka's painting as a reference to find a way to incorporate the objects. Making the field surrounding the bottle was my biggest obstacle, but other than that, it was so enjoyable and rather quick to make. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed my process and walkthrough of how I completed these 2 drawings. I will be making more videos in the future, going more in depth into the process of color studies and drawing and so on, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and yeah.